Before we start this video, a large thank you to MK, Seth, Frederico, Braden, Bai, Swizz, Jacob, Robert, Bread, Loic, Freakin, and Kidani for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And a large thank you to Slim Shaggy for their immense support to the channel on Patreon. I appreciate you very much, my friend. Hello everybody, and today we're going to animate our characters. So I'm going to start by going into the art folder here. I'm going to drag in my materials and textures into their respective folders just to keep this clean. And I am then going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call it animations. And then inside that animations folder, I'm going to make another folder, and I'm going to call it humanoid, because that is the type of animation we're going to be dealing with today. And inside that humanoid folder, I'm going to make another folder for core. And then inside there, I'm going to make one for locomotion. And this is just preference. I just like putting all my actions inside a folder I call core. Okay, so I'm then going to drag my animations into the project. And I'm going to be using the Straight Sword animation set for this tutorial series. This is actually a package on our asset store page. And it contains everything you need for a Souls/Elden Ring tutorial. Light attacks, heavy attacks, two-handed, one-handed, dual-wielding, locomotion, rolling, basically anything you can think of that we're going to be using. So, we're only going to be doing locomotion in this video, so I will leave on screen now and in the description a free version of animations that contains a locomotion set. Basically, you only need the walk and run cycles, and you want to get one that has 8-way directions, because in the future, when we have lock-on, we're going to need to implement strafing as well. So if you are using the same pack as me, or you already have a pack from our asset store page, I'm just going to take all of the walking, the running, the idle, and the sprinting animations. It's in a folder called core, if you have the latest version. And I'm going to drag them into our locomotion folder. And then inside there, I am going to go to all these animations. If you don't already, make sure you have the animation type set up to humanoid. And make sure you have the animation settings set up correctly. It will differ for some animation packs, but for ours, you want to loop all of your locomotion animations. You want to make sure that you're using the original, the root transform position and transform rotation, and check these checkboxes. And then typically I like leaving mine on center of mass. And again, these will all differ depending on the animations. And if you have our pack, it's already set up, so don't worry about it. After that is all well and good, we're going to go back to our main folder here and then go to data. Let's make a new folder. And I'm going to call this animator controllers. And this is just going to be the controller of all the animations. We're going to make one for our humanoid models. And then we're going to start setting up our animation blend tree. So right click, create animator controller. And I'm going to call this humanoid. You can call it whatever you want. If you want to have different ones for your characters or your players versus other characters, that's cool as well. I'm then going to go to my player prefab, and I'm going to drag in the humanoid animator controller on the animator component here. And now, when we start dropping animations, it will apply to this animator controller. So, let's go to Window, if you don't have it open, Animation, and open the Animator window, and then just drag it up here like I have it. So, the base layer is where we're going to make a locomotion. Let's create a new empty state from a blend tree. It's important to use blend tree. And I'm going to call this locomotion. But I'm going to call it locomotion one-handed, because in the future, we're going to change our locomotion animations from one-handed or two-handed. So I'm going to create a new blend tree. We're not going to do this in this video, though, but just have it here. Locomotion two-hand weapon. So basically, we're just going to make it so your weapon animations will change if you're one-handing or two-handing a weapon. There's a lot of different ways to achieve this. You could just use a mask for your arms or the top of your body, but we're going to use a whole animation set because I think it looks the cleanest. So in parameters, I'm going to delete the default parameter blend. That might give you an error because it makes this when you make a blend tree, if it's not there already. And I'm going to create two new floats for horizontal and vertical, okay? So in this video, we're only going to be utilizing the vertical, but I'm going to show you what both do and why because they're both very important. Horizontal basically deals with when we're strafing or locked on, and I'll show you what I mean. So go into your blend tree, click on it, change the blend type from 1D to 2D freeform directional. And you'll see we have two parameters here. We have, it's blend and blend by default. Change that to horizontal and vertical. And what this does is basically it's going to select an animation from all the motion fields that you add based on these two parameters. So 0, 0 will be no movement on the vertical axis and no movement on the horizontal axis. So that will be your idle animation. Of course, I forgot to drag mine in my folder. So 0, 0, no movement on either axis will be idle, okay? Now, if we move forward on the vertical axis, let's say we want to do half the joystick forward, which would be 0.5. Because let's say the full joystick forward is 1, and half joystick forward is 0.5. Think back to our input video. then that's going to be walking forward, okay? And I'm going to give a visual representation of this afterwards. I'll explain it as I'm going through. I want this to be super clear, so we're going to go through it one by one. So you can see here, if I play this animation and change the vertical to 0.5, you're going to see that the character begins to walk forward. So we're using these blend tree parameters between horizontal and vertical. 0.5 in the vertical is now walking forward. So let's add another blend tree. So, or another motion field rather. 0.5 on the vertical and then 0.5 on the horizontal would be forward right. Because think about it, on the left and right axes, 1 is right, minus 1 is left, if you remember from our input video. So 0.5 is halfway forward, and then halfway forward on the up and down axes and the left and right will be walking forward and right. Likewise, 0.5 on the vertical axes, but minus 0.5 on the horizontal axes would be walking forward and left. So you can see where I'm going here. Basically, the horizontal axis depicts your left and right direction, and the vertical axis depicts your forward and backwards directions. So 1 on vertical would be running forward, 0.5 would be walking forward, and then 0 would be idle. And likewise, minus 0.5 is walking backwards, like we have here now. Minus 1 is running backwards. So you take that same logic and apply it to your horizontal axes. 1 is running to the right. 0.5 is walking to the right. 0 is idle. Minus 0.5 is walking to the left, and minus 1 is running to the left. So then you combine those two axes, and you get a blend tree. So 1 on the vertical axes and 1 on the horizontal axes. Well, you take the vertical first. 1 is running forward, and then you take the vertical or the horizontal, and 1 will be running to the right. So you combine those, and you get running forward and to the right. That's all it is, basically. You're just taking these values, and as the tree suggests, you're blending them together to get a result, these parameters rather. So it's very simple. What you want to make sure you do correctly is not to forget to put in a value, because typically in a game that uses omnidirectional movement like this, you have forward, and then you have forward right, forward left, then you have backwards, then backwards right, backwards left, and lastly right and left. So you have a full encompassing movement set of usually at least 8 different directions, and you have your idle. So we're going to do a full set here for the walking, and then we'll do the exact same thing here for the running as we did for the walking. Again, instead of 0.5 now though, we're going to be using 1, because 1 represents the furthest possible direction you can be going. So like I said, if you think of a joystick, again, I use that example because it's the easiest one. If you tilt the joystick halfway up, it's 0.5. If you tilt it all the way up, it's a full value of 1. Now for sprinting, which we're not covering in this video, but I'll discuss it lightly, we're just going to use a value of 2, and we're going to change that value from 1 to 2 if the game detects you are moving the stick forward and holding down a button. But like I said, not important. Don't worry about that right now. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, let's just set up what we already have working in game, which is just our running around and our walking. So that looks good. I bet I've forgotten something. So when I eventually see an error, I'm just going to come back to this. I'm going to quickly brush through a lot of these and check just to make sure. But usually when I set this up, I always forget 1 or 2 animations, because that blend tree above there, that does not look right. So just let me run through these and see. Okay, so we got the running forward and right, and so the running forward and left looks incorrect. So I either have something done wrong here or I don't have it added in. So I'm going to quickly scan my blend tree, and it would appear, looking at this right now, I don't have it added. Oh, right here, I have a walk where the run should be. So you will know if something is done wrong, because when you get the character in game, when you try running in a certain direction, it will look odd. Okay, so we're definitely going to have to come back to that in a moment, because I probably missed one or messed something up. But let's go to the parameters and talk about this. We have horizontal and vertical. So we basically change the animations by changing these values in our animator. And that's quite simple. We just need to find a way to reference these via script from our input. So let's go over to the player manager, and let's actually first we're going to go to the folder containing the character base class scripts. So we're going to make a new script called character animator manager. And then we're going to add one to the player called player animator manager. And as you know by now, we're going to make it derive from our base class of character animator manager. So what is this going to do? Well, this is going to handle everything in the future that has to do with animations, things from animation events to allowing certain instances and actions to happen during specific frames of animations, all that good stuff. And also now on the topic of this video, it's going to handle updating our animator's parameters. So go to the player prefab, add the player animator manager, and then I have an error here because this blend tree is trying to use a parameter that we haven't deleted, as I said before. So if you want to get rid of this error, go to the blend tree and go to the parameter here from blend and just change it because we don't have the parameter blend anymore. We deleted it. I'm going to make it go to 2D freeform directional and just set up our new parameters and then clear, and that error is gone. Anyway, back to what I was doing. Go to your player animator manager, and we're going to open this up, delete our start and update functionality, drop in our namespace as is per tradition. One gentleman asked me, did I know I could set this up automatically? And I do know that, but that would be against tradition, so we're going to keep doing it manually. I'm going to make this drive from the character animator manager, and I'm going to go and make a public void update animator values on our base class. So any class that derives from this in the future can use this. And I'm actually going to change that name again to update animator movement parameters because I want that name to be very distinct and clear. So we're going to need two things, a float for horizontal and then a float for our vertical value. So horizontal value and vertical value. Now there are two ways to do this. Okay, I'm going to show you both. And I'm going to discuss why I think either of them are fine and why I'm going to use one in this case over the other. So I'm going to make a character manager variable. I'm going to call it character. I'm going to make an awake method here. I'm going to say protected virtual void awake instead of private void awake so we can override it on parent classes. And I am going to go back into my project window and open up the character manager. And I'm going to make a public animator variable here. I'm going to call it animator. And then I am going to hide this in the inspector because we don't need to see it. And in the future, when we have a lot of variables here, it's going to make a cluttered look. We don't need to see that this is available. We just need other scripts to access it. So I'm going to use the hide in inspector keyword there. So on awake, I'm going to say animator is equal to get component animator because the animator component sits on the same game object as the script. I'm then going to go back to the character animator manager, and I'm going to reference the animator from our character.animator, and I'm going to say set float, as in float parameter, and we're going to pass the name of our parameter by using two quotation marks and spelling it out as a string, so horizontal, and I am then going to pass the horizontal value, and then we can do the same for the vertical value. Now, this in and of itself is fine. We're going to change it a little bit though, but this as it stands, this way of doing it is absolutely fine. And this is fine in my opinion because you can just pass the values as they are. Now, some people, this is optional one, might want to clamp it in this function. And I'll show you what I mean. So here's an example of clamped code. Here's option 2. You make two variables for snapped horizontal and snap vertical, and you always snap the values to a value of 0, 0.5, or 1, okay? And the benefit of doing this is if you have bad animations, or not bad animations, but animations that don't look good when they're blended part way together, this is a great way to do it. And then you pass the snapped values instead of the regular values. Now, I'm not going to do this, and the reason being is because I actually already snapped my movement anyway, but even if I didn't, I probably wouldn't do it with this animation set. It depends on the project entirely. Like I said, you can try both out and see what you like more, but we actually snap our movement on our input manager, so I'll show you what I mean by that. So make sure you call character on awake, character equals get component character manager. Now go back to your player input manager, go down to handle player movement input. And you can see here, we clamp the values so they are 1, 0.5, or 0. So it's already snapped here. So then we pass these values here to our animator manager. Now to do that, we have to get a reference to our player. So let's make a public player manager variable and call it player. Now, as you know, there should only be one local player in the game, only one local player at a time. So let's go to our player manager and we can figure out who the local player is by saying on network spawn, if you are the owner of this player, it must be your local player object. So we say player input manager.instance.player equals this, the same way we set up our camera, because there's a singleton version of the player input manager and we just access it from that. So then down here we say player.characterAnimatorManager because we referenced that. Actually, we haven't yet, so let's make that. On the player manager, let's make a public player animator manager. Sorry, not the character animator manager. And we're going to call it player animator manager. I'm going to use the keyword for hide inspector again, and I'm going to say that the player animator manager, I'm also going to make the locomotion manager public for the future because we're going to be accessing it from other classes. I'm going to say the player animator manager is equal to get component player animator manager. And then we can access that from the input manager. And then we can access our new function from the base class because it derives from that class. And then we can set our animator parameters. So player.player animator manager. And then what did I call that function? Update animator movement parameters. So we pass that. And then we come down here and you would think we pass our vertical and horizontal. Well, no, we don't. Because like I said, we don't want to be using the strafing animations unless we're locked on. We only want the forward animations. So we pass our movement amount. Okay, so I'm going to make a comment here in the future. Why do we pass 0 on the horizontal? This is because we're not locked on. And when you're not locked on, you only want your character to either be idle, walk, or run forward. Because your character always rotates to face the way that they're moving. Okay? When you're locked on, your character is always rotated towards their lock-on target. So then you would want to strafe if you're trying to emulate the locomotion of a Souls or Elden Ring project. So in the future, that'll become more clear, but all you need to know right now is you need to pass 0 on the horizontal because we don't want any horizontal blend tree movement. And then on the vertical, you pass your total movement amount. If you are locked on, it's a little different. Then you pass your vertical and horizontal values. So that will give you a strafed movement set. If you want to test it out, just go ahead and pass the strafed animations and see how it looks. But right now, this is all you need. So I messed up my blend tree, so I'm going to fix it quickly. And while I fix it, I am going to, I forgot the left and right running animations, and I think I misplaced a couple animations. So what you want it to look like in the end is kind of almost like a star if you're doing it the way I'm doing it. And you want to make sure that in that little graphic above these little windows for these animations, you want to make sure it doesn't say one animation is too close to another because that likely means you have the same animation value in twice. So when you're done, and if you move the animations around like me, be careful because sometimes the values change if you don't press enter after you've edited them. So that looks good. I think that's right. I think I'm missing running backwards because I can see here there's nothing on the bottom end of the star. So let me just see here. Core, run, space B, and I'm looking for main hand run backwards. Okay, so 0 and -1, and that looks perfect. So it should look like this. The one on the northern end of the star is like a sprint forward. And then on there you can see you have the left, right, backwards, left, forward, left, and that looks great. And I have one there twice, so I'm going to delete it because it was giving me that warning. So if you have it there twice, it will tell you that the animations are too close together. But it should look like this in the end. This is how it should look if you did it my way. Okay, perfect. So let's move on now. Now, if I go into the project here and press new game, you can see I'm moving. Oh, but nothing is happening. Why is that? My character is T-posing, and as funny as it is, that's not the result we're looking for. Well, go to your model and make sure that it's set to humanoid and not generic because you can only use humanoid animations with a humanoid model. Make sure you're using the right avatar and then click apply and boom, just like that. Look at that. We have movement and our gentleman is running around here now and that looks great. But you can see it's kind of snappy. You see what I mean? When I stop moving here, look at that. It kind of transitions from a walking animation to an idle animation quite instantly, and it's a little harsh on the eyes. But other than that, it's working as intended. So I'm going to stop moving, and I'm going to first go to the input manager. I'm going to say, if player is equal to null, we're going to return because we don't want to try to run this code. If there's no player, you'll get an error. That's a bad time. And then back on the point I made before, you can see here, just to make it very clear, it's very snappy when you stop moving. So we're going to address that. It's quite simple. You go to where you update your animator movement parameters, and you make a comma for the time, the damp time, and then time.delta time. So I'm going to say over 0.1f by time.delta time, and you save that, and you go back into the game, and look how much nicer that looks. I'm moving, and there you go. It blends back into the position now instead of snapping over a time of 0.1f. It looks a lot nicer. So that is good. Now I am going to basically just take these, or what it's doing is basically just taking these values and applying them over time, and that's how it's getting this effect. Now if I go into multiplayer, you can see I have my second character. He just kind of slides around locked in an idle position, and as hilarious as that is, that's not the result we're going for either. It does look pretty cool though. But this is happening because the network has no way of knowing what his animator values are on his side of the game because we're not telling it. So we need to tell the network what our animation values are, our parameter values, and we need to apply those values to his version of the game object on our game. So we do that by making a new header in our character network manager for animator. You don't need to, but I'm just doing it for neatness sake. But what you need to do is make a new network variable of type float, and we need one for our horizontal value, and then one for our vertical value. And we're also going to need one for our move amount value, okay? So what we're going to do, as I'm sure a lot of you probably guessed already, is we're going to, if you're the owner, apply these values to the character network manager. And if you're not the owner, we're going to apply it to our character's animator. So if you know what to do, or if you think you have a good idea of what to do, go pause the video right now and do it. Just take off and try it. Do it. It's a great way to get some experience and maybe potentially learn something. And if you mess it up, you come right back and we're going to do it anyway. So, but I encourage you right now, pause the video, go and try to set this up without watching how I do it. So I am now going to take the animator horizontal parameter. I'm going to copy and paste it, make it animator vertical parameter. I'm not really sold on the name, so I'm probably going to change that, to be quite honest. I'm going to paste that again. I'm going to make the move amount parameter. Again, not network move amount. I'm not really sold on these names. I'm probably going to, it'll come to me. Okay, so we can save that then. Let's go over to our character animator manager, and then let's make a float for our vertical, a float for our horizontal. And now we're going to go over to the player locomotion manager. Going to come down here now and just kind of minimize all these functions so it's a bit neater and I can see what I'm doing. And right below awake, I'm going to make an override update. I can see I can't override it because there's no update in the base class. So go to the character locomotion manager, which is your base class, and let's make a protected virtual void update. And we're doing this so we can override it on the parent class. And in the future, if we put any logic here on the base class, we can basically use both. So now over on player locomotion manager, override update. And what do we want to do here? Well, we want to write some logic using our vertical movement, our horizontal movement, and our move amount. Now, I'm going to say if player is owner, then do this. Otherwise, we're going to do something else. So let's go over to our character manager. I'm going to make this public, the character network manager variable. And then I'm going to hide it in the inspector. Now I'm going to save that, go back over to the player locomotion manager, and I'm going to say if we are the owner, player.character network manager dot, and what did I call those names? Vertical, I really don't like those names. We're going to change those immediately. So I've called it animator vertical parameter. I'm going to rename that to just vertical movement because it's just make it match the name in here so it's very clear what's happening. We're taking the vertical movement, horizontal movement, and the move amount from here, and we're assigning it to our network manager. So player.character network manager vertical movement dot value. This is very important. Make sure you say dot value is equal to vertical movement. And then we're going to say player.character network manager dot horizontal movement, which is horizontal parameter, going to rename that too, is equal to your horizontal movement. And then lastly, the player character network manager dot move amount is equal to our move amount. And this is why I had those parameters placed on this script. I explained a couple of videos ago. You can just grab them from your input manager, and you can. I just wanted to have them here just for the sake of naming conventions mostly, and having them here like this. Again, if you didn't create the vertical, horizontal, and move amount, and you were just grabbing it from your input manager, just grab these values from your input manager too, if you would like. Okay, so else, if we're not the owner, then instead of assigning these values, we need to be grabbing these values. So we're going to say move amount is equal to player.character network manager dot move amount dot value, and then we're going to do the same thing for our vertical and horizontal movement. And after that, we need to make sure that we are actually grabbing the values from our input manager on this script. So we're not grabbing empty values here. So I'm just going to take a look at my handle movement code momentarily. Right below that too, what you want to say is player animator manager dot update animator movement parameters, and then you pass these parameters. And since we're not doing lock on yet, just pass 0 and the move amount. That's it. That's if you're not the owner, because if you are the owner, this is already being done for you via the input manager. So if not locked on, pass the move amount, just like before, same note. I'll make another comment here for the future. If you are locked on, there'd be an if statement here, pass the vertical and horizontal values. And then in the future, there will also be one for sprinting where you'll pass a 2 in the vertical position instead of the vertical value. But anyway, don't worry, that's the future. Now, over here on player locomotion, get vertical and horizontal inputs, just add a move amount is equal to player input manager.instance.move amount. That's it. So there we go. I'm going to change the name of this from get vertical and horizontal to just get movement inputs or values. And there we go. That's it. So let's save that. Now, if I go into the game and I run around, you can see, yep, I'm running. I'm animated nice. And there we go. I'm running on the other client, and you can see the animations are synced across the network. So see, network isn't so scary when you know how to use network variables, and setting stuff up is actually pretty straightforward. So this is great now. So now when the other character moves on both screens, You can see here, this is the other client, and you can see the movement on the other person's screen. Awesome, excellent. So now, before we go, I'm going to basically reiterate the blend trees to make it as clear as possible. So I want you guys to think of a blend tree, and also after that I want to make a short announcement, and I want to just kind of get a point across. So if you want to stay for that too, that's cool. A blend tree, just think of it like you think of our input, okay, on a joystick. So imagine a joystick again, just like back in the input video, you have up, down, left, and right. And there's the y-axis, which is up and down, and the x-axis, which is left and right. So on the y-axis, you have 1 to -1. 1 is forward, -1 is backwards. And on the x-axis, you have -1 and 1, just like the other axes, but -1 is left and 1 is right. So all we're doing with the blend tree is we're taking these two axes and we're basically giving the values to the blend tree, and that chooses our movement animation. And the reason why we're not using the strafing animations right now is because when you lock on, your character is always facing its lock-on target. So then you're going to combine your forward movement with your left and right movement, because that will allow you to have that strafing and circular motion around what you're locked onto, and that's where the horizontal set of animations comes into play. But don't worry about that right now. If you want me to actually do a deep dive and get into really explaining the animation blend tree with a lot more, I guess you could say visual cues, let me know when I can do that. Now, I want to reiterate my goal with this series, gentlemen, and that is I want you to walk away from these videos having learned how to do something on your own. It's great to use these videos as a reference, and there's nothing wrong with getting information for tutorials. I still do it with a lot of things, but the only problem with tutorials when they become a crutch is that if you take them and you're copying code but you don't know what's happening, that can absolutely get you pretty far. But if there ever comes a point where you need to edit the project's code to add a feature that you want, or you want something specific to what you desire, then you are absolutely at a loss if you don't know how to edit it. So make sure before moving on from these videos, you know what is happening and you know why I am typing what I'm typing. Make sure you really get familiar with the concepts that are being addressed here, and just take some time to read through the documentation, and do not be afraid to mess around and break stuff and make stuff on your own. You can always circle back and fix it later. You will learn so much more if you just try to break stuff and write stuff on your own ahead of time. Okay, guys. As usual, if you made it this far, I would really appreciate a like and a comment, because it actually helps out the video and the algorithm so much. I know I sound like a broken record, but it genuinely does. Also, as usual, a large thank you to my Patreons. I appreciate each and every one of you so much. I will see you guys in the next episode.